Hook. What would you do if the only power you had was the truth? Have you ever walked into a place where people lower their voices the moment you enter, where the air feels too cold, not from the AC, but from fear? No one talks about Elena Brooks. Didn't come to Thorn Media Group to make waves. She was just a temp janitor. No benefits, no welcome, just a broom and a silent rule: stay invisible. But what happens when someone who has nothing to lose speaks a truth no one dares to say? What if you were her, cleaning a room you didn't belong in, staring into the eyes of a CEO known for firing people over a typo, and then telling him he was the problem? Would you risk your paycheck, your safety? Would you stay quiet just to survive? Or would you say something and become the change no one saw coming? This isn't a story about rising to the top. It's about standing your ground when the ground beneath you was never meant to hold you. Take a breath. Lean in. Lean. Because sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that changes everything. They said no one ever talked back to Jasper Thorne, but Elena Brooks wasn't here to follow scripts. The wind cut down Michigan Avenue like it had something to prove, sweeping crisp leaves across polished sidewalks. The sky was that soft, pewter gray, particular to late October in Chicago, when the cold wasn't just a rumor anymore. At the corner of Thorne Plaza, a 27-story tower of mirrored glass loomed above the morning haze. Inside, the lobby buzzed with quiet tension. Receptionists with clipped smiles handed out ID badges like they were forged in gold. Interns shuffled papers, with eyes glued to the floor. Elevator doors opened and closed with a near-religious hush. Elena Brooks stepped through the revolving door in a jacket too thin for the season. Her sneakers, white once upon a time, squeaked faintly on the marble floor. No one looked at her. That was the point. At the security desk, a man with more earpiece than personality handed her a plastic badge marked temporary maintenance. He didn't speak, just nodded toward a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee. In a supply room, no bigger than a coat closet, a supervisor handed her a standard-issue uniform, navy jumpsuit, oversized and stiff at the sleeves. Keep to your schedule. Stay invisible. Don't talk to execs, the woman said flatly. Eyes not even meeting Elena's. You're here 3 weeks. That's it? Elena gave a short nod. Understood. She tied her curls into a loose knot, pulled on rubber gloves, and pushed a cleaning cart into the elevator. No music played, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft hiss of floors ticking past. Floor 14, break room first. The glass-walled room was pristine, too clean almost, like a display model. A stainless steel coffee station hummed softly. A few employees milled about 2 suits, whispering over cups. A young woman eating oatmeal without looking up. No one said hello. No one acknowledged the woman with the mop. Elena moved through the room with practiced silence. Spray, wipe, rinse, repeat. The smell of cinnamon from someone's bagel lingered in the air. A screen above the sink looped muted news segments. No one watched. Then came the shift, the air pressure, the posture, the energy all changed the moment the elevator dinged again. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Footsteps, steady and precise, entered the room. No one else moved, not even a cough. He poured himself coffee. Black, no sugar, no cream. The man didn't wear a name tag, but the weight of him did the introducing. Tall, dark overcoat, open just enough to reveal a slate gray suit that fit like armor. Jasper Thorne. Elena wiped down the counter just inches from where he stood, her hands steady, her gaze focused. "You missed a spot," he said, voice low and even. She turned her head slowly. He wasn't looking at her. He sipped his coffee with the kind of indifference people usually reserve for background noise. "There was no spot," she replied quietly. That pulled his attention. His head turned. Their eyes met. A beat, then two. He studied her, not in anger, not even in offense, just observed, like a man reading a book he didn't remember picking up. "And if I say there was—" She held his gaze. "Then you'd be mistaken." The silence in the room went from stiff to suffocating. One of the interns actually stopped mid-bite. For a moment, it seemed like he'd say something else. But instead, he nodded once, set his cup down harder than necessary, and turned toward the door. "We'll see how long you last," he muttered as he walked out. The room didn't exhale until the door clicked shut behind him. Elena reached for her mop again, unfazed. She returned to mopping, but every eye in the room was now watching her like she had flipped a switch. No one noticed the janitor until she looked the CEO in the eye and told him he was wrong. The rain tapped lightly against the window panes like a metronome set to unease. Morning had barely begun, yet the 17th floor of Thorne Media Group was already alive, with tension not loud, but lingering. Polished wood floors gleamed under soft, yellowed lights. The kind of lighting meant to calm, but in truth, only made shadows look longer. Elena Brooks pushed her cart past the elevators, her steps slow but purposeful. Her uniform still didn't fit right, too long in the sleeves, too tight at the shoulders, but she wore it like armor. She'd learned long ago that sometimes being overlooked was a strategy. She wasn't 10 feet down the hallway when she heard the whispers. 3 days. Tops, someone muttered from an open office door. "Elena," right, another voice said. The janitor with a death wish laughter, quick, nervous, like teenagers after a prank. Elena didn't flinch. She'd heard worse in rooms far more dangerous. But she did slow her pace, just enough to make them wonder if she had. At the front desk, Lucille Monroe sat sorting inter-office mail into neat little piles. Her hands moved slowly but precisely wrinkled fingers with rings that looked older than most employees here. When she saw Elena, her eyes softened. She didn't smile, exactly, but her face warmed in that way older women do when they recognize something unspoken. "You remind me of someone we lost," Lucille said quietly. Elena paused. Lost Lucille glanced down the hallway. She spoke the truth too early. Or maybe the wrong way. Either way. We stopped seeing her after that. Elena didn't know what to say, so she didn't. Just nodded once, then moved on. She was wiping the fingerprint-free chrome near the conference room when she heard the low click of a door opening. A voice followed, calm, deep, unmistakable. "Miss Brooks." Jasper Thorne stood in the doorway to his office, one hand resting on the doorframe like he had all the time in the world. "Step inside." The room was dim, hushed by the sound of rain and the muffled hum of the city far below. The walls were lined with awards, though none looked recent. A subtle scent of leather and cedar lingered in the air. He didn't sit behind his desk. Instead, he stood by the window, back turned, arms crossed. "You made quite an impression yesterday," he said without looking at her. "I didn't plan to," Elena replied, her voice even. "Exactly," he said, turning slowly. "That's what bothers me." She waited. He studied her like she was a puzzle missing too few pieces to ignore. Tell me, Miss Brooks, why aren't you afraid of me? The question wasn't sharp. It was genuine, curious. Elena met his gaze. Because fear only works on people who need something from you. That earned a silence so thick it swallowed the room. I've heard executives fumble through interviews, he said. You answer like someone who's already decided the consequences are worth it. Elena shifted slightly, but not back, never back. I clean floors. You build empires. But at the end of the day, both can crack if no one's honest. A flicker in his expression, something almost human. You're either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both, she said calmly. Either way, I'm still here. Another pause. He didn't argue, didn't dismiss, just watched her like he wasn't sure what to do next. You may return to your duties, he said finally. She nodded once, turned, and walked toward the door. As she stepped out of his office, a silence spread down the hallway, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was curiosity. Truth doesn't always shout it. Sometimes sips coffee and listens. The rain hadn't stopped since morning. It hadn't grown stronger, just steadier, like a drumbeat echoing down alleyways and into the cracks of the city. By nightfall, Chicago had softened under the downpour, traffic slower, lights more golden than harsh, and the cold less biting when paired with steam rising from sidewalk grates. At the corner of 9th and Union sat a small diner with windows fogged from the inside and a red neon sign that buzzed softly in the mist. It was the kind of place people passed 1,000 times without ever stepping in until the night. They needed warmth that wasn't artificial. Elena Brooks sat in a vinyl booth, her jumpsuit damp from the walk, her mop leaning against the edge of the table like an old companion. Across from her sat Cameron Doyle, a junior IT tech, with tired eyes and a lanyard still clipped to his belt. Their mugs steamed between them, the faint clink of spoons and soft hum of an old jukebox filling the silence. You really told him there was no spot, Cameron asked, half smiling, half awed. I told the truth, Elena replied, fingers wrapped around ceramic warmth. That shouldn't be unusual. It is here, he said. It wasn't always, but it is now. Lucille had suggested this diner to her earlier, called it a place that remembers who you are. Elena didn't know what that meant until she walked in and realized no one looked twice at a janitor sitting down like she belonged. Cameron leaned back in the booth, his gaze drifting toward the rain-slick sidewalk outside. There used to be someone else who spoke up, he said, voice low. 5 years ago, Danielle Rhodes, finance department, smart, sharp, saw some irregularities in vendor contracts, overbilling, kickbacks, hush payments. She brought it to her manager. Next thing we knew, she was transferred to a department that didn't exist. Elena didn't blink. No one said anything. They were scared. She vanished. No emails. No contact. HR said she resigned voluntarily. Maybe, Elena said. No one listened the right way. Cameron stared at her like she'd spoken a language he almost remembered. The door jingled softly as someone exited the diner. Both turned their heads. Jasper Thorne. He moved with that same practiced calm, trench coat slung over one arm, black gloves in his hand. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't look left or right until he did. His eyes landed on Elena. Just a second. But it was enough. They locked eyes through a rain-streaked pane, and neither of them flinched. Then he gave the smallest nod. Not a command, not a test. Something closer to acknowledgement. Then he walked away, coat shifting with each step, vanishing into the rain like the closing line of a story not yet finished. Cameron exhaled slowly. He only notices two things, he said, money and silence. You broke one. Elena didn't smile, but her eyes didn't look away from the door. The diner felt warmer than it had 5 minutes before, not because the heat kicked up, but because something had changed, something subtle, like the pause before a storm shifts direction. They sat in silence for a few beats, letting the jukebox fill the space with a faded Frank Sinatra tune. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was real. Cameron whispered, "You do realize he's watching now, right?" By the fourth day, the whispers didn't die, they multiplied. It started with a missing assignment slip, then a delay at the supply room, then a floor that Elena had polished 2 hours earlier suddenly looked like it hadn't been touched in days. By Thursday, the building had taken on a different kind of chill, one not from the cold October wind pressing against the glass towers, but from inside. From quiet eyes, watching too long, voices that hushed too fast, and doors that closed just a second, too loudly. Elena pushed her cart down the hall of the executive floor, feeling it, the shift, the pressure, like someone had turned the air heavier. Every corner seemed to carry fragments of conversation she wasn't meant to hear. She's not even full-time. Right, HR changed her schedule, said she missed a shift. Funny, she's always early. She didn't flinch, but she noticed. At the far end of the hall, Clara Drummond stood, with arms folded in front of the frosted glass wall of the strategy room. Co-O of Thorn Media Group, Clara was elegance sharpened to an edge. Silk blouse, tailored skirt, hair pulled so neatly it seemed to hum with tension. Her posture was effortless, but her presence, heavy, like perfume applied to dominate, not to delight. Clara didn't speak to Elena directly. She didn't have to. The schedule change came from HR effective immediately. No note, no warning. You're now assigned to double sweep executive restrooms and redo all lobby polishing during peak hours. The new list read. Lucille glanced at it from her desk and let out a soft sigh. That's not a schedule. That's a message. Elena nodded. I got it. Later that afternoon, she walked into the media boardroom, mop in hand, only to stop short. The floor just cleaned 2 hours earlier was smeared with muddy footprints. Coffee splashes trailed from the glass wall to the back row of chairs. A napkin stuffed into a corner vent. None of it had been there before. Someone had undone her work. She stood there for a moment, the mop loose in her hand, not angry, just still. Then slowly, she moved forward and started again. Behind the glass, a few junior executives pretended not to notice. She didn't look at them, but when she exited the room, Jasper Thorne was walking down the hallway from the opposite end. He stopped as their paths crossed. His eyes moved briefly from the damp mop to her calm expression. Then, without breaking stride, he turned left, straight toward the strategy room. Inside, Clara stood alone, tapping a tablet with long, lacquered nails. She didn't look up when he entered. Interesting delegation techniques, Jasper said. Clara smiled without warmth. It's a schedule. Nothing more. She cleaned that room already, he said, and he stepped closer. Someone dirtied it again, intentionally. Are you suggesting sabotage? Jasper, she asked, glancing up. I'm asking why a janitor needs to be monitored like she's a threat. Clara turned slowly, tablet lowered. I'm not scared of a cleaner. Jasper's expression didn't shift. Then what are you scared of? She walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. I'm scared of what she makes you become. That hung in the air between them. Not loud, not cruel, just honest. Jasper didn't respond right away. Bond, right? He simply leaned back slightly, gaze lingering on the reflection of the hallway outside. Then, for the first time in days, something unexpected crossed his face. A smile, small, genuine. Maybe that's the point. The elevator used to skip her floor, not anymore. The brass doors slid open with their usual hush, and for a moment, the silence inside was louder than the city outside. It was almost 5 p.m. on a Friday, and the building exhaled a kind of tired that only came after a week of holding itself too tightly. The golden autumn light filtered through the tall windows, catching specks of dust in midair like secrets floating between deadlines. Elena stood at the edge of the lobby, cleaning cart beside her, waiting. The elevator was full, interns in crisp shirts, assistants with phones glued to their palms, mid-level managers who still buttoned their coats all the way up. No one made room. No one moved. For a breathless second, it felt like the old rhythm, again tight, closed, practiced. Then Jasper Thorne stepped forward from the back and silently took a step sideways. The gesture wasn't grand. He didn't say a word. But in that narrow space, he created just wide enough for Elena to enter something shifted. She pushed the cart in without hesitation. The conversation stilled. Breaths caught. One assistant subtly tapped her co-worker's arm. An intern blinked, like he was watching something that shouldn't be possible. The doors closed behind them. No one said anything for 16 floors. When the elevator reached the executive level, Jasper exited first, but paused, just enough to glance back at her. Elena gave a quiet nod, not submissive, not defiant, just clear. Words spread before the hour ended. Did you hear he waited for her? Held the door like she belonged there? She didn't flinch. Lucille, overhearing the talk while sorting mail at the front desk, smiled to herself. Sometimes, she murmured, people need a new rhythm to remember they can dance. By the time Elena reached the mailroom for end-of-day supplies, an intern named Jordan, nervous, baby-faced, no more than 22, was waiting, shifting from foot to foot. "Miss Brooks?" he asked. Voice cracking slightly. She looked up. "Sorry, I wanted to ask, how do you speak truth without fear?" Her hands paused on the clipboard. "You don't," she said, quietly. "You feel the fear, but you do it anyway." He blinked, surprised by the simplicity. "That's it. That's everything." He nodded, not sure what to say next, and she let him walk away with that thought sitting heavy in his chest. Upstairs, Jasper stood by his office window, watching as the last rays of sun slipped behind the skyline. Clara had left early. Most of the floor had emptied out, but the building didn't feel empty. It felt unsettled, like the week had cracked something open that wouldn't close again. At 5:42 p.m., Elena received a message from the internal system. Simple, direct. "Would you speak briefly at Monday's all-staff meeting, just a few minutes, about truth?" JT. She stared at it for a long time, not because she was unsure of her answer, but because the question itself meant more than she could explain. Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves scraped gently against the sidewalk, swirling at the base of the building, like they, too, were waiting to see what came next. As she left the building that night, the wind felt different, like something was about to break open. She wasn't invited to speak, but she did. And no one stopped her. Monday mornings at Thorne Media Group used to start in silence, Meetings were precise, words were measured, smiles were tight. Today was different. The main conference room, usually reserved for quarterly reviews and carefully rehearsed investor briefings, was full. Assistants, analysts, senior staff, tech support, even maintenance leads had been asked to attend, chairs filled early. Some leaned against the walls. A few stood at the back, coffee in hand, murmuring into their sleeves. Outside, the golden leaves of October danced in the breeze beyond the wide windows. Inside, the air was crisp with anticipation and something else, something like waiting for a ripple that might become a wave. Elena Brooks stepped into the room 5 minutes before the hour. She didn't look for a seat. She didn't need one. Instead, she found a spot along the wall, near the far end, beside a coat rack and beneath the soft buzz of a heating vent. Quiet, present. Across the room, Clara Drummond adjusted her scarf and narrowed her eyes. Jasper Thorne hadn't taken the podium yet. He stood to the side, flipping through a single sheet of paper he wasn't really reading. The room settled as the clock struck 9. "Good morning," Jasper began, voice steady, but not loud. "Today won't be long, but I believe it might be different. And different, lately, has been a good thing." A few eyebrows lifted. He continued, "I've asked someone to speak this morning. Someone most of you didn't expect to hear from in a room like this." He turned slightly, eyes scanning the edge of the crowd. "Elena." She didn't move right away. She waited for the hush to deepen. Then she stepped forward, not rushed, not hesitant, just grounded. She didn't take the podium. She didn't raise her voice. "I'm not a speaker," she began. "I'm a cleaner. You all know that." No one responded. No one had to. "I've cleaned your offices, your desks, the corners behind your chairs you didn't think anyone would see. And I've noticed something. You can't clean a place that refuses to see its dirt." A murmur rippled through the air, but it wasn't rejection. It was recognition. I've watched people whisper instead of speak, avoid instead of address, perform instead of lead. And I get it. Fear is efficient. It keeps people in line, but it also keeps them small. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. "I'm not here to fix you, or this company. I'm here to remind you that no job, no title, gives anyone the right to ignore the truth." She looked around. Not at anyone specific, yet somehow into everyone. You want a cleaner company? Then start with your culture. You want honesty? Reward it. You want strength? Make room for vulnerability. Still, no one moved. "One last thing," she said. "If someone like me can stand up here and speak, then maybe silence was never strength. Maybe it was just habit." And then she stepped back. Not far, just enough to return to her place against the wall. For 2 long seconds, the room didn't breathe. Then someone at the back clapped once. Another joined. Then another. Within moments, the room thundered with applause. Not polite, not practiced, real, raw. A woman near the front wiped a tear with the back of her hand. A man in IT lowered his head, jaw tight. Elena didn't bow, didn't smile. She just nodded like she was acknowledging the dust finally being cleared. Jasper looked at her. Just looked. No words. The kind of look that said everything and nothing all at once. In the middle of the applause, Clara leaned toward a young executive beside her and whispered low. Her voice laced with something sharp. She just became a threat. Power sends warnings, but the truly dangerous ones come unsigned. The mailbox creaked louder than usual that morning. The fog hadn't lifted over the street yet, just a soft veil that made everything look like memory. Elena stepped onto the porch of her small building, wearing the same old coat she'd worn for 3 winters now. She wasn't thinking about work. Not yet. Just the coffee brewing inside, and whether the bus would be on time. Then her fingers brushed something unfamiliar. Not a flyer, not a bill. Something heavier, smoother. She pulled it out, an envelope. Cream-colored, no stamp, no return address. Just her name, not typed, written, carefully, in sharp, almost elegant script. Her stomach turned before her brain caught up. She stood there a moment, the quiet around her too still for comfort. Then she opened it. Inside, a single folded sheet. No greeting, no sign-off. Just one line. You've gone too far. Step down. That was all. No fingerprints, no smudges, no reason. Just the weight of fear, dressed as formality. By the time she reached the office, her expression had shifted. People said, "Good morning." She nodded, but she wasn't really present. Jasper noticed it the moment she passed his office window. He opened the door. "Elena?" She paused, then stepped in. Something wrong. She didn't speak at first. Then, wordlessly, she handed him the letter. He read it, once, then again. His jaw tensed. "Where did you find this?" "My mailbox." No stamp. He held it at the edges, like it might burn. "I want to bring this to legal," he said. "No, Elena." "If I act like prey," she said softly, "they win." Jasper looked at her. Really looked. "You're not afraid I'm tired of being afraid. That's not the same thing." He said nothing for a moment, then laid the letter down flat on his desk. His fingers didn't leave it. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "It means I'm getting closer." Later that day, Cameron caught up with her in the hallway, near the server room. "I need to show you something," he whispered. They ducked into a supply closet, not for drama, just for privacy. He tapped on his tablet and showed her a trace map, colored lines and timestamps. "I started monitoring internal IPs last week," he said, "just tracking strange login times." "Illegal," he smirked. "Just unofficial. And someone tried accessing your HR file remotely. Twice. Last night?" She looked at the screen. "Clara, I can't prove it yet," he said, "but the trail goes close to her assistant's terminal, and she's careful. Too careful to leave fingerprints. But this?" He tapped the tablet again. "This is more than paranoia. You think she sent the letter?" Cameron shook his head. "She didn't need to. People like her don't send threats. They let culture do it for them. Someone thinks they're protecting her." Elena returned to the janitorial wing, late in the afternoon, her cleaning cart freshly stocked, her gloves tucked in her back pocket. Everything felt normal, routine, but under it, the air had changed. Every corner she turned, she noticed a little less silence, a little more watching. Not all of it unkind, but watchful. When she passed Clara in the corridor, there was a pause. Clara's heels stopped clicking for just a second. Their eyes met. No words exchanged. Just the cold acknowledgement of women who no longer needed introductions. Jasper spent most of the day behind closed doors. He didn't call her back in. He didn't send a memo. But she knew he was sitting with that letter still on his desk, wondering how many more like it were waiting. At 6:47 p.m., Elena stood at the break room sink, washing her hands. The sunset reflected off the skyscrapers beyond the glass. She looked at her reflection and didn't see fear, not exactly, just weariness and resolve. She took out the letter once more, ran her fingers along the ink, memorized the tone of each word, then folded it again. She whispered to herself, not for drama, but because it needed to be said aloud. This means I'm getting closer. When lies wear suits, they get printed on company letterhead. The hum of the elevator was soft, but the tension in the executive lobby could have cracked marble. Elena stepped out, wheeling her cleaning cart, as usual, but this morning, heads turned not with curiosity, but suspicion. A young woman from accounting, a face Elena barely recognized, stiffened as she passed. Another assistant whispered something behind a palm, eyes narrowing. At first, Elena thought she was imagining it. Then Lucille didn't meet her eyes. It wasn't until she reached the glass conference room that the pieces came together. A printed memo, crisp and official-looking, lay on the table. Someone had left it there on purpose. The letterhead bore her name, Elena Brooks, in bold. Below it, a statement apparently condemning executive waste, demanding policy changes, and questioning leadership accountability. None of it was her voice, but all of it sounded like what she might say if she'd ever been foolish enough to write it down. She picked up the page, slowly. The executive seal was fake, but convincing. The signature, not hers, but close, a setup. She heard the whispers. She really sent that who does she think she is? This place used to have structure. Elena folded the memo carefully and placed it in her pocket. At that exact moment, Jasper Thorne exited his office. His eyes scanned the room and locked onto Elena. One look was enough. He didn't speak. He turned back inside. 5 minutes later, Elena sat across from him. Memo on his desk, her hands folded, his jaw tightened. "This wasn't you," he said flatly. "A statement, not a question." "No," she replied, "but someone wants it to be." Jasper picked up the intercom. "Bring it and security." And Clara Drummond. Within 15 minutes, the room filled with unease. Clara entered last, composed as ever, clipboard in hand, heels clicking like punctuation. "I assume this is about the rogue correspondent," she said airily. Jasper nodded. "The fake memo with Elena's name on it." Clara raised a brow. "Fake. That's a strong accusation." From what I saw, it reflected her tone quite accurately. Elena remained still. "That's not the point," Jasper snapped. "This wasn't authorized. It was distributed without traceable approval. We're tracing who sent it to the printer queue. Every memo needs an origin." Clara smiled. "And if it leads to the janitor," Elena finally looked up, "then I'll accept whatever consequence comes with it. But I won't accept silence in the meantime." The IT manager cleared his throat. The document was sent from a shared workstation, no badge scan. "But we'll check camera logs and admin keys." Clara stood. "I do hope we're not wasting time on rumors." She turned to leave. That was when Jasper spoke again. "If you fear one woman with no title," he said calmly, "maybe the problem isn't her, it's you." A silence swept through the room. Clara paused in the doorway, her spine straight, Jasper added, his voice quieter but sharper. "I'll find out who printed that memo, even if it ends at your desk." Clara's smile faded as Jasper added, "I'll find out who printed that memo, even if it ends at your desk." She asked for truth. This time, he gave it with the whole world watching. The conference room at the Chicago Media Center wasn't used to this kind of stillness. Rows of chairs lined with reporters, laptops open, cords curling across the floor like tangled nerves. Camera lenses stared ahead like eyes waiting for someone to blink. Outside, the wind stirred the last of October's leaves along the sidewalk, brushing against glass doors that hadn't seen this much tension since election season. At the front of the room, Jasper Thorne stood behind the podium, not flanked by lawyers or publicists, not propped up by rehearsed statements. Just him, alone, with a microphone and a decision. "Good morning," he said. His voice didn't boom, but it carried. This is not a press conference to manage scandal. This is not an apology dressed up in corporate phrasing. This is a correction. Back in a quiet diner 2 miles away, Elena Brooks sat alone at the window, her laptop open, volume low. The waitress hadn't disturbed her in 10 minutes. Even the coffee beside her had gone cold. But she didn't touch it. Not yet. On screen. Jasper adjusted the mic once, gently. Many of you have heard rumors. Some of them started right here in this room. Others were fed, twisted, made for clicks. The truth is simpler, quieter, and often ignored. He paused. Elena Brooks is not a liability. She's not a scandal. She's not a secret. She's the one person in this company who had the courage to say what others only whispered. Elena shifted slightly. Not from pride, but disbelief, Jasper went on. She didn't ask for recognition. She didn't seek out influence. She took a job no one respected and treated it with more dignity than some of our highest titles. She cleaned our floors while we buried our messes. A ripple moved through the room. Some reporters stopped typing. Others started. Faster. She reminded me, he said, that leadership is not about being feared. It's about being worthy of being followed. A journalist, middle-aged, with salt in his beard, raised his hand. "Mr. Thorne, is it true Clara Drummond has been suspended?" "Yes." "Effective this morning, pending internal investigation into procedural misconduct and the distribution of falsified memos, our legal team will ensure full transparency." Another voice cut in. "Younger? Sharper? Do you believe Ms. Drummond acted alone?" Jasper didn't blink. "I believe silence allowed it, and that makes all of us accountable." In the diner. Elena exhaled softly. Her fingers ran over the rim of her mug. Then, from the back of the press room, a reporter asked the question no one had dared yet. "Sir, there's speculation of a personal relationship between you and Miss Brooks. Would you like to address that?" The room tightened. Jasper didn't flinch. "Yes, I'll address it." He looked directly at the cameras now. "I love the truth she taught me to see." A hush fell. You could hear the buzz of an old fluorescent light. One journalist dropped their pen. "She helped me see that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, by listening, by owning your faults, by showing up when it's hard, not just when it's easy. And if that scares some of you good, it means we're waking up." In the diner, Elena didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply reached forward and closed the laptop with both hands. Like sealing a chapter she didn't know she was part of. She didn't need applause. She didn't want validation. But those words, spoken into microphones, carried through Wi-Fi signals, printed across live captions, they mattered. Outside, the wind pushed leaves against the diner window. Inside, she stirred her coffee one last time. Now let's see if it lasts. She started with a broom. She ended up rewriting the company's blueprint. The sun filtered softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly renovated conference room. It was late November, the kind of cold that curled around your coat collar and whispered of winter. Elena stood near the edge of the long oval table, smaller now, more open, more human. Just weeks ago, she had stood quietly at the back of this room, hands rough from scrubbing, shoulders squared against silence. Now, She held a letter in her hands, her official resignation, folded neatly, like the work she always left behind. Across the room, Lucille adjusted the coffee setup near the corner credenza. Her movements were slow but practiced. When her eyes met Elena's, she didn't smile. She nodded, once, deeply, the kind of nod that said, "I see you." Outside the room, quiet murmurs filled the hallway. People were gathering, not just executives, not just assistants, everyone. Elena had asked for one last meeting, but no one quite knew what for. Jasper Thorne arrived last. He didn't carry a folder or a phone. He didn't make an announcement. He simply entered and found Elena already there. For a brief second, their eyes met. He didn't ask her to stay. That was never the deal. Instead, he said, voice low and even, "Walk forward. I'll meet you there." She gave a faint smile, then placed the letter gently on the table. When everyone was seated, no nameplates, no titles, Elena stepped forward. Her voice was calm, steady. "Most of you met me when I was pushing a cart," she began. "I didn't come here to change anything. I came here to work, to clean, to stay invisible." Some people looked down. Others didn't move. But something strange happened. I saw dirt no one wanted to name. And when I spoke about it, I didn't expect applause. I expected the door, a few chuckles, but soft, respectful. This company didn't need me to lead it. It just needed someone to stop pretending everything was already clean. Jasper sat at the far end, watching. Not like a CEO, like a listener. Elena continued, "Change isn't loud. It's consistent. It's awkward. It's slow. And it's built not in conference rooms, but in break rooms. In how we treat the people no one notices." She paused, unfolded a small letter from her coat pocket, and read, "To the interns who no longer whisper, to the assistants who breathe easier, to the janitors who now look people in the eye, thank you. You reminded me why voice matters. Even small ones, especially small ones." She folded the letter. There was no applause, not yet. Then Lucille clapped. Once, twice, and then the room followed. A full, standing ovation. Not for a promotion, not for a speech, but for truth, for dignity. Elena didn't cry, but some did. As the room quieted, Jasper walked over to her. "You sure?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I was never meant to stay, just to remind the place how to breathe. You did more than that." She tilted her head. "Then keep it breathing." They didn't hug. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. That afternoon, Elena left the building the same way she'd entered it, through the side door. No cameras, no announcement, just the soft click of her shoes on the tile and the whisper of autumn wind outside. Lucille walked with her to the elevator. Before the doors closed, she pressed something into Elena's hand. It was a small brass nameplate, old, scratched. It read, "Custodial, E. Brooks." Elena smiled. "Keep it," Lucille said. "Legacy matters." Weeks passed. The company shifted. Meetings became shorter. Listening became standard. Transparency wasn't a department. It was a behavior. And then, one Monday morning in early December, a new floor map was posted in every elevator. It listed departments from top to bottom. No hierarchy, just presence. At the very bottom, in bold black letters, it read Sanitation, Elena Brooks, Legacy Lead. There was no portrait, no slogan, just a quiet acknowledgement. And those who knew smiled. Because sometimes, the floor you start on becomes the foundation everyone else learns to stand upon. Sometimes, all it takes is one voice to remind an entire building what silence had hidden. Elena didn't arrive with a plan. She came with a mop and a memory and left with something far more powerful, the respect she never asked for, but deeply earned, because kindness without condition and truth without volume still hold the power to transform. We often assume power sits behind desks, but sometimes it walks in worn-out shoes and speaks in steady tones, just like a quiet ripple can shift an entire tide. Your truth spoken with grace can be the beginning of something no one saw coming. And if this story stayed with you, even just for a moment, maybe it's time to look around and ask, whose voice haven't we heard yet? Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, even just a little, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more voices like Elena's to light stories that matter, stories that stay. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never stop listening.